Hey guys, my name is Neil and welcome to NEEL Workshop Zone. So in this episode we will be talking about the selection part of control structures. So in our previous episode which you haven't checked it out, the link will be in the description. We talked about control structures and how there are three types of main control structures. So if you did watch the video and just made a little recap of what happened, control structures are basically the way a code runs. So there are three main types of control structures. You have you have sequential, you have selection, and repetitive. So as I've said, sequential basically means line by line. Selection basically means choices or like conditions, and as you have repetitive, which are loops. So I talked about sequential in my previous episode. So now let's talk about selection. So selection basically consists of four main types of control statements. We have if, also known as simple if. You have if else. You have nested if. You have if, elif, and else. So just for this episode we will be talking about the first main types of it. So first let's talk about simple if or if. So just to make you understand this concept a little bit more, let me tell you an example. So imagine you're at your home and imagine suddenly someone rings the doorbell. So you think, you immediately think, if it's somebody I know, I open the door, but if it isn't, then I just sit there. So that is basically how your brain thinks and how the normal happens. The way that you think or the same way that the condition happens is basically how it happens over here. So just for example, let's say A is equals to 2. And let's say if A is greater than 1, which is it is because 2 is greater than 1. So if A is greater than 1, then print A is greater. So what you're basically saying to the computer is you're basically giving the computer a choice. So you're basically saying to the computer, if this is correct, so if that statement that you gave is correct, then you need to print A is greater. But if it isn't, then you don't need to print it. So since the statement that we give is correct, it will print A is greater. But if just let's take for example, it has something like if A is greater than 3, then print this. Since the statement is false, it prints nothing. So when you click enter and the code works, you get no answer. So that's basically how if operator works. Now let's talk about if else. So if else operator is kind of like if operator, but it's basically a simultaneous option. So let's take the same example that we took from before, but let's take imagine at the house and the same thing happens. You basically think that if if somebody that I know comes, then I open the door, or else check just in case if it's something important. So that's kind of how we think. So that's basically how if else code works. It's basically if code, but it's also a second statement for what happens if the first statement that you gave is not correct. So for example, let's take the same example, A is equal to 2. And let's write if A is greater than 1, print A is greater. Now this is basically how how we wrote the code before, and if it is correct, which it is, then like I said before, it prints A is greater. But if it isn't, so if it isn't, like for example it's this, then it doesn't print it. But here you can write something like else print A is not greater. So since here, like I change the number, since the first condition is not true, it else prints the second one, which is A is not greater. So that is basically how if else works. So the comparison between if and if else, like I said, is if the first condition isn't correct, it just prints nothing. But here, if the first condition isn't correct, it still prints something else that kind of indicates that the first condition isn't true. So that is basically how if else operator works. So that is basically how if and if else works, which are some of the most common and also important important types of control statements that you need to learn. So next you still have nested if and if elif else. Nested if is a little simple, but if elif else is a little complicated. So we'll talk about both of them in the next episode. And I really do recommend practicing if and if else in your Python ideally, because it's a little important. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell so don't miss out any new videos. And that's all folks, and see you next one. Bye bye.